Welcome to NycosRPG. I'm Jonathan Albin, your host, and this is Ask Me Anything. Today's episode is a stand-in for my usual Game Master soapbox. I've been noticing there's been a lack of turnout, so I figured I'd run it as a ongoing Ask Me Anything session. If you are a viewer and want to be a participant, feel free to leave a comment in the chat box. I have that accessible right here. I'll be able to answer any questions that you ask there. Or if you are interested, you can join our Discord, which is listed down below. And once you get enlisted and I get you a role, you'll be able to talk directly on the channel and ask me questions verbally. So I'm a big fan of conversation over monologues. So pardon me, I'll be eating during the first part because I forgot to get that done earlier, and so I'm so professional. I will eat right in front of you, so there you go. If you've ever been on the show before, I'm Jonathan Albin. I've been a game master for just shy of 50 years, mainly because there wasn't RPGs before that. But I learned to play Dungeons and Dragons from one of the guys who designed the game. David Arneson was my buddy's grandpa Dave, and I've been a storyteller and game master for the entire time. With an average of one session per week for that entire duration, I consider myself one of the most dogged a game of dungeon masters and the longest of storytellers out there in this format. And so I tend to have a plethora of information, a wide variety of information about the game's business, role-play games in particular, and Dungeons & Dragons in specifics, dating all the way back to its pre-launch days. I was only 11 at the time, but I was a pretty precocious storyteller, and even from my second week, I was doing the game master chore instead of just being a player. Having said that, I entertain all forms of roleplay. That is so weird. At any rate, so today we'll cover a plethora of topics. As I said before, I have a bunch of questions here that are listed from players that have asked various things over the last few months that I haven't been able to get to online, or that maybe I didn't cover in the proper level of detail and distinction. So I've put them on here, not necessarily to cover every single one of them, but to be kind of a checklist of things that we might cover. And I will not cover them in any particular order, but obviously one of the first ones would be, what is a role-playing game? And if you are a human being, you've played a role-playing game, whether you know it or not. When we're children, it's a very common experience to play through a role with your friends. You're going to play astronauts, or we're going to play explorers, or whatever, and each person takes on a persona or a concept of what they expect to have as part of the life of a adventurer or an astronaut or whatever, and therefore they role play it. And the only difference between that form of role play and role-playing games is the games actually have a set of rules to determine success or failure on given actions. Another of the principal questions that's asked is why play a role-play game? And at first it seems kind of obvious to get to experience being somebody that you're not. But with the way the world is right now, it seems kind of crazy when you can get on a computer and emulate just about everything. There are video games, there are simulators and emulators, there's virtual worlds and all kinds of ways to interact in the electronic marketplace. So it's like, what's the point of playing a role-play game? Well, one of the primary reasons to play in a role play game is that you are playing in a competitive market where the other mind you're engaging with is a human being. In a lot of virtual environments, and specifically a lot of video games, you're playing against a artificial intelligence or an emulator of some sort, or even just a pile of random NPC responses that have been pre-programmed. So there's no real tete-a-tete, if you will. There's no real interaction. And so a role-playing game gives you the opportunity to engage with another mind in those roles. A lot of people don't even know that there are a variety of types of role-play games. They're familiar with what they've seen on video through Critical Role or Adventure Time or one of these others, where they've seen the facsimile of a game master who's portraying information to the players and the players are interacting. But many of those are actually scripted and pre-planned out so that there's really no surprise or adventure to it. It's a matter of expression or portrayal. And that's really fundamentally no different than watching a movie. And if we're going to be experiencing third-party roleplay, we might as well be watching a professional, right? So when we talk about the differences in roleplay games, you have to realize we're probably talking about a difference in genre, in the format and the storytelling elements, and that makes a big difference in the way they play out. If an environment is based on physical conflict and combat, that's going to be a lot different from one that's based on personalities and drama. So certain roleplay games are focused on the drama and the interaction at that level, and then others are driven by action or excitement or whatever, and so therefore they're radically different in the way they play out. So fundamental differences depend on which type and detail you want to go to. So the basic genre differences are going to be mechanical. Are you playing in an environment that's drama-based? The game system is going to be focused on dramatic scenes and going to downplay or underemphasize the physical conflict. Others are going to be highly conflict-related and therefore downplay or even ignore the dramatic portion. And when you do this, when you have these variances and differences, then the play mechanism changes, and as the mechanism changes, your ability to input information into the game changes. Now, when you talk about how to differentiate or how to choose which one you're going to play, it's a matter of what your affinity is. And if you haven't got an affinity yet, if you don't have a choice of what you were wanting to experience, then I would recommend playing one of the more mainline. That is so weird. I have a scar there, but I don't remember having a scar there for today. Must have been a Mandela effect change. That's very poignant. It wasn't there, I swear, yesterday. So, or it's a glitch in the system and it's not really there. Or conversely, I am a different person and realize it yet. All kinds of fun stuff in that. So then the next is when you figure out which system you're in, what are the secrets to being a storyteller? Well, the trick there is to match your players' expectations with what you're wanting to portray. If your players are looking for high action, high interest, high excitement, and you're only providing a nice, dry, dramatic telling, you're not going to have a great experience. Neither will they. So the secret to storytelling is to learn to balance or scale what your players expect with what you want to provide. So the the way that happens, therefore, is to be a really good listener. You want to be able to gather information from the players in relatively quick order, to be able to present them with the material so that it's what they're willing to accept it and will play into what they're looking for from the game. Now, there's a completely separate question. I'm going to go ahead and kind of insert it in here because these are all topics I'm willing to discuss, and I can go way beyond this if you simply put a commentary into the chat box which you'd like to ask. But are RPGs a dead or dying art? And I would say they are a dying art only because people are losing an appreciation for that art. And that's, if you look at it from a historical standpoint, most art forms have had rises and falls. Have had a rise and a fall, or plurals of them. And RPGs are an art form specifically based on the storyteller as creator and the players as co-creators, whereas it's now turning around to where the game master is more of an adjudicator or a line judge and not able to invest himself in the story creation without running into challenges or difficulties with the property itself. I also think players aren't looking for it any longer, to the great extent they did before. Mainly because they don't know what they're missing. My experience has been a brand new player that has never played a role-play game before becomes instantly attracted to a true role-playing game, but the amount of work necessary to maintain it is perhaps a little daunting to them because they are so much more familiar with a entertain me kind of a format where the game master or the product is there for them to enjoy at their own leisure, and they can make of it what they will, and so therefore a developed story arc or a developed storyline just doesn't suit people today as much as it used to. They want to find their own path through, and they don't see the merits of having an unlimited system. In addition to that, I believe that we have set ourselves up on this path because we've become so imitative in our tastes. If we have only seen Critical Role as an example of a roleplay game, then we expect every roleplay game to have the same nuances and dynamics. And that is, players that have a theatric bent and can project their voice or use different voices or whatever, and that therefore are fundamentally professional voice actors. And when you run into a roleplay group and you find that that is not the case, you're kind of disappointed because you expected that to be the norm. And so we want that experience, but we don't want to do the work that would have to be for us to be a part of that experience. I also think it's a mechanistic challenge when the framing and the format has been so ingrained for so long that the idea of a new concept arises and is discarded or ignored out of hand because it's not the norm. I'm not getting the same experience, so it can't be the same. And no one sees or very few see the advantage of such a prospect. Well, if you're a role player and you're looking for a game in your area, the obvious way is to go to a local game store, because game stores tend to have games that play in the store, therefore be able to find a group relatively quickly. But most people don't even know that there's a game store in their area, or if there is, how to find it. So if you go to the Facebook or any of the social media platforms, you can find usually a section called LFG looking for game, or LFG looking for group, or looking for game master, or whatever. There's 100 different ways to find them. And you just simply put in your parameters for your game. I'm looking for a level 1 through 4 game for a beginner, or I'm wanting to find a level 9 through 12 game for an expert, and therefore be able to align that way. Of course, the level 9 through 12 expert, each person's determination of what expertise can be is different, so it's harder perhaps. So sometimes it takes 2 or 3 different interviews or conversations before you find the one that is suited for you. And ultimately, if you're not able to find it in that fashion, you can find game masters such as myself who will, for a fee, run the game that you're looking for. So. If I were going to give information to a new game master, the first thing I would say was to take a look to what you are reading or have read in the past. The more literate you are, the more subject material you've consumed, the more fulfilling and enriching your story will be, because you'll have more frameworks to operate from, and all of that will make for a better play situation. Next is have a session 0. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you as a game master take a few minutes with each of your players, get an idea of what they're looking for in their games. That is so weird. Remember that. But with the session 0, you're able to convey to them a bit of information about the story you're wanting to tell, and more importantly, you're able to gather information from the players on what they would like to have experienced in the game. So, high fantasy versus low fantasy, high tech versus low tech, heavy negotiation or quick trade, all kinds of different mechanics can be discussed in a session 0 to get you past that difficult moment of getting started. And if you're a new game master, I highly recommend you read through all of your materials, whether it be your game master's guide or equivalent, or your monstrous compendium or monster manual, or whatever you want to call it, your collection of creatures you're going to use, and kind of get a feel for what your environment will be, so that your portrayal to the players will feel as natural as possible, so they can become inoculated into that world, to become a part of that story. Now we could go off on this next part, stories of the evolution of RPGs. I could talk for hours on the process of evolution that games have gone through, from their origins and the lack of orientation and guidance, all the way to the modern forms, which are quite antiseptic and cut and dried. But there's no reason for me to do that when I'm here by myself, so I'm not going to do that. A key point in tips to playing well with others is to be a good listener. If you're going to be a game master in a group, make sure you hear all of the instruction that the players present and find ways to make it all work as much as possible. If you are a player in an RPG system and you've got several other players, learn a propriety in terms of taking your turn, not really pursuing what other people are doing or being concerned so much with. It's that you interfere with your own course of action, and so on. Obviously, sharing comes into it. That's both sharing the credit and the blame, and the sharing of treasure, etc., etc., etc. So being able to be a good player is really essential if you're looking in the long terms of becoming a storyteller, because you have to be able to be compassionate with the other players as they act on their terms as well. So I didn't make it anywhere near the amount of time that I anticipated, but I also don't have any viewership, so these things feed on themselves. So I will see you in the next show next time. Remember, we're here every night at 11 p.m., so if you have any questions or comments, feel free to have them ready, locked and loaded, and I'll be able to answer them in the next session.